Alrighty, we are now on to an alternate history hub video. It's been a hot minute, but this time we are asking the question of what if America never joined World War One? And I feel like he's asked this question before. I thought he's done this video before. Has he not done this video before? Maybe it's one of those older topics that he's wanting to revisit. Can't remember. Been a while since I watched some alternate history hub. So, not wasting any more time. Dive right in.
World War I. The Central Powers lost. Spoilers.
Yeah.
Just 3 years after Franz Ferdinand got shot, Europe
Franz
was already
Ferdie.
reaching its breaking point. The Central Powers were almost falling apart, Germany was suffering food shortages due to the Baltic blockade, and both Austro-Hungary and the Ottomans were on the brink of collapse. The Entente
no.
wasn't much better off. Russia got so tired of fighting other people, it withdrew from the war to fight itself. France and the UK were going deep into debt to pay for food and war material, while morale on the front lines slowly eroded. But both sides believed they could still win, or at least survive longer than the other. And so they fought on, with no end in sight. Then Uncle Sam joined the fray. The Entente's morale was boosted tremendously, as millions of fresh American soldiers began mobilizing. The Central Powers' morale
USA.
cratered. Germany launched a desperate last-ditch spring offensive to break the Entente lines and take Paris before the Americans could arrive. It didn't work. The lines held, the Rohirrim arrived, and the Central Powers accepted defeat. So on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918,
Not the
thanks
11th
to
year.
Uncle Sam tipping the scales, the war to end all wars ended until the next one. In the
Yay.
aftermath, Europe had suffered 4 years of war, so
And the wars that happened in between those two wars.
it was kind of riddled with devastation and economic and social instability. But hey, the US joining at least got it over with, shortened what could have been a longer and more devastating war. And while stability, for most of the nations, is good, stability is no fun. So let's have some fun. Let's make it worse. So here's the thing.
Yay!
America really didn't want to join the war. I made an entire video on how most of the US, especially Woodrow Wilson, was hell-bent on staying out of the conflict. In short, the average American didn't really care about Europe. They didn't see a reason why they should cross.
The average American still kind of has that opinion. The average American seems to lack a lot of empathy sometimes. A lot of the time. It's kind of annoying.
The ocean to fight in the deadliest war in human history because some princeling got shot in Bosnia? Where's that? I live in Missouri. Wilson believed the US was morally above war against Europeans and should instead only participate as a mediator in the peace deal. Unfortunately for Wilson, Germany couldn't have done a worse job for PR, but they were really good at forcing the US to join the war. That was the one thing they were good at. At the start of the war, Germany used unrestricted submarine warfare in the Atlantic, sinking any ship suspected of carrying war material to the UK, whether it flew the flag of a neutral country or not. This included sinking the Lusitania, which killed over 100 Americans. The American public was understandably not happy about this, and forced Wilson to warn Germany to stop sinking neutral ships. You know, a slap on the wrist. Germany agreed, temporarily, but by 1917 they started doing it again. Of course, they knew this would anger the Americans, but instead of doing anything sensible, Germany sent the infamous Zimmerman telegram to Mexico, asking them to attack the US to keep them from joining the war. Honestly, this is
Mexico that was very unstable at the time.
one of the most perplexing decisions I've ever seen a modern nation do. Why would you ever think this was a good idea?
Yeah.
When this became public, Wilson's hand was forced. He declared war. Also, let's get this out of the way. Mexico wasn't going to attack America to reclaim Texas and all of this. It's kind of like asking an amputee to sucker punch Mike Tyson. But here's the question you actually care about. What if Germany was just a bit less careless? What if they never resumed
less stupid?
unrestricted submarine warfare and just didn't send the Zimmerman telegram? Let's imagine a world where no matter what, Wilson gets his wish, and the US sits out the Great War. Now what?
Arminius.
Without Uncle
Hmm.
Sam rushing in with his trusty war crime grade shotgun, the Central Powers now have a real chance at winning the war. I mean, hell, look at a random Emperor Tigerstar video and pause in mid-1917. You could assume they had the war in the bag. And while in our timeline, the loss of the broken down Russian ally was replaced with a shiny American one, without the US, 1917 is just kind of a year of losses for the Entente. In April, the Neville offensive was a major flop, leading to mass mutinies in the French army. Germany unlocked chemical warfare with mustard gas, and who could forget the 473rd Battle of Azonzo, which
Yeah.
utterly shattered
I get that reference because we watched the World War I series and had to watch so many fucking battles of the Asanzo. Still not over it.
the Italian lines. On the flip side, you had Brazil declaring war on Germany, sending a whopping 24 officers to assist the French.
That's it. Off. Oh, Brazil.
Good job, guys. Jokes aside, things were really looking bleak for the Entente, and you can get an idea for their desperation by looking at the tens of thousands of troops they sent to the sinking ship that was the Russian Civil War, supporting an autocrat in the hope that he would bring Russia back into the fold. Yeah, that sure worked out. We look at 1918 today knowing that the end was near, but on the day, nobody was ready to give up. Every front mattered. In our timeline, America put its hand on the scales, and in a bid to take Paris before they came in, Germany threw everything in the kitchen sink with its spring offensive that disastrously failed. That included hundreds of thousands of Eastern Front veterans who had just joined the Western Front. So here's an idea. Let's make the next 15 minutes of the video talking about a dystopian world full of misery, plotting, and turmoil, as millions fight for freedom in the Deadlands. Wait, did I do that just so I could make a smooth transition to the sponsored today's video? Yes, I did! Today's video is sponsored by James. That's right, James, who has been a loyal Jimmy for years. And he wrote a book. Alright, so hear me out because this is very unconventional.
Hold on.
Rather than joining up with a publisher or buying some Google ads or whatever, our fellow Jimmy here entrusted me and this community with the promotion of his book. A new novel which combines eldritch mystery with cyberpunk gothic. This is the world of John Kendricks, Dominus Carnifex of the Novus Vaticana, an executioner for the new church. This is the world of Deadlands freedom. Arcadia is a city
that's
on
a
the
thick
brink
book.
of destruction, for both outside and within, and Kendricks will have to walk a fine line between moral and damned if he's to survive. This is only the beginning, the start of a 6-part series spanning thousands of years. I'm excited about this novel, and I think you should be too. I mean, just look at that cover. That's right up my audience's alley.
It's not my cup of tea.
Look at that guy. That's an over-the-top character design that just brings a tear to the eye. Whether it be Kindle, paperback, hardcover, or the audiobook, treat yourself to a fresh new world. And plus, I think it's just really cool helping a self-publisher going his own way. So I guess, thank you, Jimmy, for sponsoring this video. Alright, so where was I? Oh yeah, grueling trench warfare, filled
Yay!
with blood, sweat, and mustard gas, and Eastern Front reinforcements. But you know what? While many World War I speculations boil down to buffing or removing the spring offensive altogether, rather than witnessing another timeline where tens of thousands die for a plot of land not big enough to bury them, why not do something as realistic, but more creative? Now, this doesn't leave us with a lot of options, but what it does allow me to do is to finally make a video on the war in Gaza. That's right, Britain took over Gaza in 1917, made the Balfour Declaration, and then quickly took over Jerusalem too from
Let's see where this goes.
the Ottomans. But with German aid to the Ottomans, this video could... Yeah, no, I'm still not touching that topic. We need to go somewhere
Thank God. Well, y'all know my stance. I've said it before. Freedom. Equal rights. Gasp. But I'm not gonna rant. I'm not gonna rant about it. I'm not gonna rant. I'm gonna hold myself back. Hold myself back. Hold myself back.
little more stable, a little less contentious. Let's talk about the Balkans.
Nope.
Let's go back
Yes, because when I think of a less contentious area, I go to the
to
Balkans.
where it all began. Now remember, no America joining in 1917 means that over 1 million soldiers from the Eastern Front are redeployed. Most go to the Western Front, some go to Italy, and 100,000 elite troops and a lot of equipment arrive to the aid of Bulgaria. Even in Kaiserreich, the Balkan theater of the war is overlooked. But what the Prussia of the Balkans was able to pull off was nothing short of extraordinary. That's right, we're talking about Bulgaria. Bulgaria is not talked about a lot, but the Bulgarians
Oh, they are.
proved themselves to be way more reliable assets to the German war effort than Austro-Hungary or even the Ottomans.
Oh, I think the World War I series also kind of overlooked Bulgaria a bit, so I can't agree or disagree here.
Opening a second front against Serbia ended its valiant last stand. When Romania joined the Entente and invaded Transylvania, Bulgaria brought it to heel. The small nation
True.
of just 4.5 million people had mobilized 1.2 million men.
Okay,
who
yeah, I
fought
remember
like
that.
hell. And in 1917, they managed to secure a win against an expeditionary force from Britain and France, who had superior numbers and equipment at the Battle of Doiran. Greece was tethering, caught between a Bulgarian invasion from the north and an Entente blockade in the south, which was applying pressure to the Greek king, who favored Germany. The Entente had committed just as many men to the Macedonian front as they did in Gallipoli, and in 1917, Germany was ready to match that. As far as realism goes, the Central Powers were already heavily assisting Bulgaria, providing military experts, equipment, materials, and multiple divisions. But here, we see them triple those figures by the end of 1917, as thousands trample over the remnants of Romania to join the war effort against Greece. The Entente would also increase their support, but considering the bleak state of the Western Front, that increase would be minimal. Now I know what you're thinking, Jimmy. Germany
I'm not
up
Jimmy.
against the mighty 300 at the gates of Thermopylae? Not quite. Because the Central Powers didn't have to slog their way through all the mountains of Greece to get to the capital of Athens. They just needed to take Salonika, where the main Entente base was, barely 100 miles from the Bulgarian border. Sparta was a relic of the past, and Athens was the political center of Greece, but it was Salonika they needed to take. The Entente had stationed so many soldiers in the Thessalonian coastal city that the locals began to call them the Gardeners of Salonika. Spring
I remember that.
1918. Generals Otto von Bellow and Gorgy Todorov prepared 300,000 men for a joint invasion in Albania and Greece. At the center, we see what's left of the Serbian army fight tooth and nail against a formidable Bulgarian opponent. The Franco-British positions near the city are impenetrable, but over on the west, we are back to our good old spaghetti-eating friends, the Italians. With such a wide front against a foe that was literally bullied into joining the Entente, lines don't hold out for so long.
Nope.
And when things go sideways, with morale at rock bottom, how hard do foreign expeditionaries really fight for Greek dirt? The German divisions take Ioania, Kastoria, and threaten Larissa, while Bulgaria completes the northern encirclement. Whether the pocket in the city withstands a prolonged siege with the aid of shipments is irrelevant. The road to Athens is open, and rebels begin chanting the name of their exiled king, Constantine. By the end of spring, the Entente defeat in Greece is assured, which leads to major repercussions. A separate peace is signed, and all foreign troops, including what's left of the Serbian Legion, sail away. Greece is forced to cede land in the
Sail
previous
away.
Balkan wars to both Bulgaria and the Ottomans. Greece would be forced to pay severe war reparations and demilitarize, and would find itself a lot less constitutional with a lot more monarchy, a German
Yay.
monarchy. That means that while life in the trenches was still one of the worst things imaginable, German soldiers could at least enjoy a nice bottle of olive oil,
Ugh.
courtesy of their new protectorate.
No.
While the olive oil bit was a joke, seriously don't drink this stuff.
The Europeans do it anyway. The Italians, the Spanish, and the Greeks, they do it anyway.
It's also kind of not. Like in our timeline, after the fall of Romania, the Treaty of Bucharest was signed, and its terms were way harsher than that of Greece. Despite his German origins, the Romanian king was deeply invested in the national interests, so he was handed with a brutal ultimatum. Romania ceded territory, disbanded most of its army, leased all of its oil wells for a short 90-year contract. Oh, and also would remain under occupation until further notice. Greece would be getting off easy by comparison. Fun fact, those same wells would ironically keep the German tanks fueled for much of World War II. The treaty was signed in mid-1918, and for the following year, millions of oil barrels were transported to Germany, alongside a ton of grain. Now think about what this means in this alternative timeline. A front line is closed, the Entente loses its two biggest allies, and footholds in the east. A lot of resources make their way west. But the biggest impact here is psychological. On the inside, Germany is hanging on by a thread. Hundreds of thousands of dead civilians from malnutrition as a result of the Baltic blockade. The Ottomans are still struggling to deal with both Entente forces and growing unrest. And Austria-Hungary was on the brink of completely disintegrating. But that means little to the average Entente soldier. A soldier who keeps getting promised something bad will happen to the Central Powers, and it never comes. Meanwhile, their own news reports just show immediate disasters. Belgium, Serbia, Montenegro, Russia, Albania, and now Greece have all fallen. The Entente was losing on every single front in the war, with no hope in sight, and the Wehrmacht was only 50 miles away from Paris. At this point, the sunk cost fallacy that kept the Entente going has kind of hit rock bottom.
Yeah,
so
I
what
can see
happens
this.
next?
Honestly, yeah, this is a really good argument. He's making a really good case for this.
Keep in mind if peace talks are announced, like morale plummets, leading to more mutinies like the one that followed the Neville offensive. But the Western Front doesn't completely collapse. By the end of 1918, everyone was done with the war. America wasn't coming in on a white horse to help the Allies, and by almost every metric, the Central Powers were winning. For the most part, the key objectives of the Central Powers were achieved, and then some. In the peace, America might finally attempt to intervene, with Woodrow Wilson offering to mediate, laying out his 14 points for a lasting peace in Europe and the world, only for the Kaiser to dismiss him as a stupid Anglophile and toss his proposal into the nearest pigpen.
Yeah.
With Wilson laughed out of the room, the real talks begin. Lorraine and Alsace are secured, and the subjugation of Serbia, plus Brest-Litovsk, already exceeded expectations. And adding the rest of the Balkans and Belgium on top was just an added bonus. Since this point of divergence has a slightly less unhinged Germany, this increases the likelihood of Kaiser Wilhelm sitting down and jotting out a treaty which would still humiliate the Entente, but not do to them what they did at Versailles. Brest-Litovsk is reaffirmed, Belgium becomes a German puppet state, Luxembourg and border territories of both France and Belgium are annexed into the Kaiserreich. The majority of Serbia and Montenegro enter the Austro-Hungarian Dominion. San Stefano, Bulgaria becomes a regional superpower. Romania and Greece become German puppet states. Germany takes colonies from Belgium, France, and maybe the UK to form a massive super colony in Africa, spanning from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. And finally, while the Entente threw Italy under the bus in our timeline, in this alternate timeline, the Central Powers do the same to the Ottomans. Sure, they don't lose land, but there is no way the British cede Egypt.
Yeah.
So apart from a few Greek islands and some territory in the Caucasus, the Ottomans get a high five and a participation trophy. So Germany
I can see
becomes
that,
an
yeah.
economic empire with no economy, because world wars and empire building cost money, and no one has any. After 4 years of conflict and over 20 million people dead, almost everyone in Europe is pushed to, or in some cases over, the edge of collapse, all for some colonies to change hands, and more of Europe's ruling class to speak German. Even more than in our timeline, no one wins the Great War. Everyone loses. Some just lose harder than others. In our world, the war to end all wars ironically spawned the deadliest conflict in human history. But here, things kind of get messier. The Treaty of Versailles and Sykes-Picot drew lines in broad, linear strokes that defined the following 100 years. But that's because the Americans and the British Empire were able to actually enforce it. What happens if the more unstable side somehow wins? Bulgaria is the one that comes out in the best shape, since the territory it gets are mostly of other Bulgarians, reconquests from lands that were lost. That said, they would be vilified by their neighbors, who, if they ever got rid of their pro-German government, would be very happy to dogpile at the first opportunity. But what about a dying Ottoman Empire with a young Turks movement and control over the Middle East? Who has to deal with the issue of Palestine? What about an Austro-Hungarian empire who lost its charismatic and progressive prince, only to gain more angry minority groups, now including furious Italians, Poles, and Ukrainians? And finally,
Not the
an
Italian.
even more depleted Germany, still on the verge of democratic, socialist, and fascist uprisings, who now had colonies to govern, several puppet governments to prop up, and millions of angry Bolsheviks on their back door. What happens is chaos. Sheer and utter chaos.
Hello.
Unless... Since the French Revolution, France has replaced its government every time it lost a war, and a couple of extra times just for sport. This would
Just
be
for
no
the
different.
fun
The
and
same
shits
would
and
happen
giggles.
in Italy, which was teetering on the edge of civil war between socialists and Catholics when they won the war in the first place. Yeah, there would be full-scale coups and or civil wars in both France and Italy, adding to the catastrophe that had already begun in Russia and Turkey. To put it bluntly, a devastated and bankrupt Europe is not good for business. And if America cared about one thing, it was business.
Money.
With three great powers collapsing and potentially turning socialist, along with rising socialist movements in many countries throughout the world, the US would be in the middle of a much, much worse Red Scare. In 1920, Woodrow Wilson is still in office, technically,
Unfortunately.
and by that point, several anarchist bombings and the Palmer raids assured the arrival of the Red Scare in the US. It's notable to mention that the losses suffered in Brest-Litovsk take out 80% of the Soviets' agricultural sector, most of its coal and a good chunk of its population too. This nerfs the Bolsheviks and Russia as a whole, while adding a ton of dissent for Germany to deal with. On the other hand, leftist movements would be widely more popular in France, Italy, and still Germany. What this means is that the United States, in a panic, officially makes Germany its second biggest trade partner and does everything it can to prop it up. They might not have wanted Germany to win the war, but since they did, well, you pick what you can get. After all, while Germany
USA.
suffered material and manpower losses, the thing it needed the most was cash, and Uncle Sam could provide at least a good chunk of it. This would keep Germany afloat for a few years, and by extension, Austria-Hungary, which would by this point only be in one piece because of Germany holding it together. But further east, the rest
That one I'm going to disagree with. I don't know if Germany really would have put much effort into holding Austria-Hungary together. I think Germany would have seen some exploitative gain to be had by the collapse of Austria-Hungary.
of the alliance begins to crumble as far left and far right protests continue to destabilize German puppet regimes, and the Reich just doesn't have the manpower or willpower to preserve everything. But all it would take is one outburst from Wilhelm, one serious rebellion put down by force, or one key Bolshevik win for the Reich to implode. A step in any direction from this point is hard to predict, and deserves its own video. But what we know for sure is that Lenin dies in 1924, with Brest-Litovsk being an even bigger disaster than in our timeline. Trotsky's fall and Stalin's rise is assured, and maybe that is when the powder keg explodes. Who knows? In any case, I hope you enjoyed this alternative take, which I think is not only realistic, but kind of fascinating, as it's quite different from many other Kaiserreich universes. Who knows, maybe you hated it, I don't know. And speaking of alternative universes,
I think that one was a good. That was What If America Never Joined World War I by Alternate History Hub. I think this one was a genuinely interesting take on it, to focus on the Greek-Bulgarian front instead of on the obvious Western front or even the Italian front. There really isn't much more to say that I don't like. I think the only thing I really disagreed with him on was that bit there at the end with Austria-Hungary. I think I think Germany would have come to the realization that there wasn't really any gain to be had by Austria-Hungary staying together now that they had defeated, the French and the British, and the French and British are now in political instability along with the Russians. I think they would have allowed Austria-Hungary to collapse, and even perhaps in that collapse look for political movements within the collapse that lean more German. I think that's my guess as to what really happened. But yeah, let me know if you agree, disagree, or have your own ideas in the comments below. Next video. What the?